In August 2019, the world woke up to a headline that sounded like a punchline. The President of the United States wanted to buy Greenland. The reaction was immediate. The Danish Prime Minister called it absurd. Late-night talk show hosts treated it like the ramblings of a madman. The internet was flooded with memes of golden towers on icebergs. For a few weeks, the world laughed. But here is the twist that most people missed while they were busy laughing. He wasn't joking, and he wasn't the first. The United States has been quietly trying to acquire this island for more than 100 years. In 1946, President Harry Truman didn't just tweet about it. He put cash on the table, $100 million in gold bullion, a formal offer to the Kingdom of Denmark to purchase the island outright. Why? Because to an empire, a map is not a drawing of culture or history. It is a balance sheet of assets and liabilities. And when Washington looks at the top of the world, they don't see snow. They see a blind spot in their defense architecture. They see $1 trillion in minerals buried under the permafrost. And they see a rival superpower moving in. This isn't a story about a real estate deal. This is the story of the next Cold War. If you want to understand the ledger that truly runs the world, the one they don't show you on the news, make sure you are subscribed. Now, let's open the vault. To understand this obsession, you have to go back further than Truman. You have to go back to the foundational logic of American power, the Monroe Doctrine. The idea that the Western Hemisphere is the exclusive sphere of influence for the United States. No European powers, no Asian rivals, just Washington. Geographically, Greenland is not part of Europe. It sits on the North American tectonic plate. In the eyes of 19th century strategists, it was a loose end, a piece of the American puzzle held by a distant European kingdom. This is why, in 1917, the US didn't hesitate to buy the Danish West Indies for $25 million in gold, renaming them the US Virgin Islands. That transaction proved a point. Denmark is willing to sell territory if the price and the pressure is right. But after the Cold War ended, Washington got complacent. They thought history was over. They thought the Arctic would remain a frozen, quiet buffer zone forever. They were wrong. The buffer zone is melting, and as the ice recedes, it is exposing a vulnerability that keeps Pentagon planners awake at night. If you look at a standard classroom map, Greenland is just a white blob drifting harmlessly at the top of the world. But if you look at a polar projection, the view from a missile silo, you see the truth. Greenland is the front door. For decades, the strategic value was about the GUK gap, Greenland, Iceland, UK. The naval choke point that Russian submarines had to cross to reach the Atlantic. That threat is still real. But today, there is a faster, deadlier threat: hypersonic missiles. We are entering an era where weapons can travel at Mach 5 times the speed of sound. At that speed, the reaction time for a leader in Washington to decide whether to launch a counterstrike isn't measured in hours. It is measured in minutes. This is where the geography of Greenland becomes a matter of life and death. The US operates the Pituffik Space Base, formerly Thule Air Base, in northern Greenland. It hosts the AN/FPS-132 upgraded early warning radar. It is a massive, dystopian-looking structure, staring unblinkingly over the North Pole. Without this radar, the US missile defense shield has a massive blind spot. If a hypersonic glide vehicle were launched from the Russian Arctic, low over the horizon, avoiding traditional sensors, Pituffik is the only set of eyes positioned far enough north to see it coming in time. If Greenland were to fall under the influence of a hostile power, if that radar were jammed, compromised, or politically evicted, the American nuclear umbrella develops a hole. And in the logic of deterrence, a hole is an invitation. But while the generals worry about missiles, the bankers are worrying about something else. The supply chain, This brings us to the Kavani Fjeld deposit, a desolate mountain range in southern Greenland that just happens to sit on top of one of the largest concentrations of rare earth elements, REEs, and uranium in the world. Now, we need to clarify a common economic myth. Rare earths are not actually rare. You can find them in your backyard if you dig deep enough. The problem isn't geology. The problem is chemistry. Separating these elements from the rock requires a brutal, toxic, and expensive industrial process. It involves acid baths, radioactive wastewater, and massive environmental damage. In the 1980s and the 1990s, the West made a decision. They didn't want that pollution. They didn't want the cost. So, they outsourced it. They let China handle the dirty work. Beijing saw an opportunity. They didn't just open mines, they subsidized them. They flooded the global market with cheap rare earths, driving prices down so low that Western mines like the Mountain Pass mine in California went bankrupt. It was a classic predatory pricing strategy. By the time the West realized what had happened, the trap had snapped shut. Today, China controls roughly 90% of the processing capacity for the magnets, alloys, and inputs that power the modern world. There is no iPhone without neodymium. There are no wind turbines without dysprosium. And crucially, there is no F-35 fighter jet without hundreds of pounds of these strategic metals. This is why Greenland matters. The Kavani Fjeld deposit is one of the few places on Earth large enough to break that monopoly. It could supply the West's needs for decades. But here is the irony. Who owns the mining rights? For years, the leading company developing the site was backed by Shenghe Resources, a Chinese company. Washington watched in horror as the solution to their dependency crisis was slowly being acquired by the very rival they were trying to escape. When Trump said, "Buy Greenland," he wasn't looking at a landscape. He was looking at a periodic table. He was trying to buy the periodic table back. Then, there is the shipping. For 500 years, the global economy has been shaped by the limitations of geography. If you wanted to ship goods from Shanghai to Rotterdam, you had to go the long way through the Strait of Malacca, across the Indian Ocean, and through the Suez Canal. It is a journey of 12,000 miles, taking over a month. But the Arctic is heating up twice as fast as the rest of the planet. The ice is retreating, and for the shipping industry, this climate catastrophe is a commercial miracle. Two new routes are opening: the Northern Sea Route, hugging the Russian coast, and eventually, the Transpolar Sea Route, cutting straight across the North Pole. These routes could slash travel time by 2 weeks. In the world of logistics, where fuel costs are measured in millions, this is the holy grail. China calls this the Polar Silk Road. They see themselves as a near-Arctic state, a term they invented to justify their presence. But how do you project power into a zone you don't own? You use the gray zone. We are seeing a surge of Chinese scientific research vessels in the Arctic. Ships that claim to be studying ice patterns or krill populations. But intelligence agencies warn that these ships are often mapping the ocean floor. Why map the floor? Because if you want your submarines to operate under the ice, you need to know every ridge, every canyon, and every thermal layer. Greenland sits at the gateway to these new Atlantic-Pacific highways. Whoever builds the ports in Greenland controls the pit stops. Whoever controls the search and rescue infrastructure controls the safety. And whoever controls the logistics effectively taxes the trade. Washington looks at Nuuk and sees Djibouti. They see the potential for a dual-use port, civilian on the surface, military underneath. This brings us to the human element. The people caught between these colliding empires. Greenland is home to 57,000 people, mostly Inuit. They have a distinct language, a vibrant culture, and a deep desire for sovereignty. but they are trapped in a financial vice. Every year, Denmark sends a block grant to Greenland, approximately 600 million US dollars. It covers over 50% of the government budget. It pays for the schools, the doctors, the airstrips. If Greenland were to declare full independence tomorrow, that money stops. The economy would collapse overnight. The standard of living would plummet. This creates a dangerous opening, a Faustian bargain. To replace Danish money, Greenland needs a new revenue stream. The only asset they have worth that much is the minerals. But this has torn the society apart. In 2021, an election was fought almost entirely on the issue of the Kvanefjeld mine. On one side, those who see mining as the only path to independence. On the other, those, like the opposition party, who fear that turning their home into an open-pit radioactive mine will destroy their environment and their way of life. The government eventually banned uranium mining, stalling the Chinese project. Washington breathed a sigh of relief, but the economic pressure hasn't gone away, and the social cost of this transition is staggering. Greenland suffers from a silent epidemic. It has one of the highest suicide rates in the world, particularly among young men. It is the tragedy of a society in rapid, forced transition, from a traditional hunting culture to a modern geopolitical pawn in the span of a single lifetime. When diplomats in Washington or Beijing talk about investing in Greenland, they are talking about buying leverage. They are talking about filling the void left by Denmark. The US strategy now isn't to buy the land. It is to be the partner of choice, to provide the aid, the investments, and the security guarantees, so that when Greenland finally leaves Denmark, they fall into the American orbit, not the Chinese one. It is a slow-motion acquisition, buying a country without signing a deed. Before we conclude, we must remember that the US has left scars here before. In 1959, the US Army Corps of Engineers arrived with a plan that sounded like science fiction. They built Camp Century under the ice, a nuclear-powered city carved into the glacier. The cover story was science. The reality was Project Iceworm. The Pentagon planned to build a network of 2,500 miles of tunnels to hide 600 nuclear missiles, a mobile launch system that could strike the Soviet Union from beneath the ice sheet. But they underestimated nature. The glacier moved. The tunnels warped and crushed the steel supports. The reactor became unstable. The base was abandoned in 1967, but they didn't clean up. They left biological waste, radioactive coolant, and 200,000 liters of diesel fuel buried in the ice. They assumed the ice would stay frozen forever. They were wrong. As the ice melts, Camp Century is slowly being exposed. It is a toxic time bomb ticking in the background of the US-Greenland relationship. It is a physical reminder to the Inuit people. When empires come to save you, they usually leave their poison behind. So, let's return to the question. Was the idea of buying Greenland absurd? Diplomatically? Yes. It was a clumsy insult to a sovereign people and a loyal ally. But geopolitically, it was inevitable. We are witnessing the end of the Atlantic era and the beginning of the Arctic era. The map of the world is being redrawn by temperature. The ice is leaving, and the sharks are circling. The US sees a shield, China sees a battery, Denmark sees a burden, and the Greenlanders, they just see their home melting beneath their feet. $1 trillion is a lot of money, but for the control of the roof of the world, for the ability to guarantee the American supply chain for the next century, it might have been the bargain of the century. The question isn't whether the Arctic will be militarized. That has already happened. The question is, who will write the rules of the new North? Is this a defensive move to protect the free world, or is it simply the newest chapter of imperialism? I read every comment. Tell me your verdict below. And if you think the race for the Arctic is cold, Wait until you see what they are planning for the moon. Stay watching.